Here are some lunch notes that I've made for my son recently. I've been making them each day with drawing or painting something on the front, and then I put a message for him on the back, and then I stick it into his lunch box, a little pocket in the front, and I pack his lunch and I send that off to him every day. I post what I make every morning on Instagram and other places, and somebody recently asked me if I wouldn't mind sharing how I make these particular ones, and so that's what I wanted to do for you today. I start out by picking my paper, and I have this whole stash of paper that I was fortunate enough to get from a tag sale, and I'll just kind of go through and pick out some paper that I think is interesting, and I'll usually pick a few of them to prepare background. I make one a day usually, but I'll prepare the background so I have something ready to help condense the time. It usually takes me between 15 minutes and 30 minutes each morning, but if I have the background prepped, I can help condense that time. So what I'll do is I'll cut down the piece of paper to a smaller size. I'm not particular about what size it needs to be, just that it needs to fit into the pocket, and so this seems to be a standard kind of a size. And then I round off the corners because the pocket has this mesh on it, and if the corners are right angles, they'll snag in the pockets. So I'll round off all of the corners, and it turns out to be a really nice little size, about 2 inches by 3 inches. And I like using this cardstock. It makes it heavy enough to take the paint and to take the lunchbox and all the handling. So I would recommend, if you're wanting to make some lunch notes yourself, to make them thick and durable. And then I line them up, and I'm going to be working on the backgrounds right now, and I'm not thinking particularly like what is the end result. I'm just laying down some color, and these are going to be the background to the images that I'm going to put over the top of them. And I'll just take my brayer or paintbrush, doesn't really matter. These days I'm really into my brayer, so I'll roll some color on there, and then I will let that kind of sit and put another layer of color. And what I'm trying to go for is not necessarily an even coverage, but something that is interesting. So I'll come through, once I get this coat on there fairly decent, I'll come through and I'll splotch on some more different color, and I'll try to allow for a really uneven coverage. I'm not going to try and roll it to the ends. I'm going to try and make it somewhat inconsistent, because I find that it makes it interesting when the image is overlaid on top of that. And here, as I'm going, you'll see that I'm getting some strong coverage. The paint is covering pretty well over the print, and I really want to see the print through just a little bit, and so I'll keep brayering over it to pull the color back off of it. So a bit more brayering, and I'm thinking about, right now the color is, there's too much yellow. I want to have some contrast and some more interest. So I'm thinking my next color is going to be something with some contrast to help make some pop. This usually takes a little bit longer than I intended to, but it's also kind of therapeutic and kind of a meditation, so it's fun to smear some paint around. So even before it dries, I put another color over the top of this one, and here's some contrasting, a little bit contrasting kind of a color. It's still analogous. It's beside the other color on the yellow on the color wheel, so it won't be too contrasting, but the blue is a complementary color, so now that's going to contrast a lot. So I'm excited to see what will happen with that. So I'll spread that one out, and again you're seeing how I'm getting a lot of coverage with that paint. It's not as transparent, so I'll just keep spraying over the top of it, and with a brayer you can usually pull some of the paint back off again. And sometimes it doesn't turn out how I expect it to, which is completely fine. I'll just go with it. Alright, we're almost to the end of the brayering. For some reason, the brayering is taking a lot longer. We're going to get started with putting an image over the top of this. But here I'm liking how this has different areas of color on this background, with the green and then the orange and the yellow, so I'm going to leave that one. And then I'm finding out real quick that this blue is a very thick paint, and so I'm going to end up getting a lot of coverage over the top of this one. But I got to be cool with that, because you never know what's going to actually happen. So I'm going to pull some off, but whatever ends up in the end. Now we're ready to create the image on the top of the lunch note. The background is dried, and I'm using a color to block out the overall shape of the image that I'm wanting there. And I know that I want to make some kind of a face. I'm not sure what the details will be necessarily, but I'm just thinking about the overall shape of it and the general kind of, I'm thinking partly that it's an animal, so that's why I put some ears near the top, but it may have some human qualities too. I'll figure that out as I go. And I'm using my finger so that it's not necessarily too precise. And then when I get done with that, I blow dry it, because I'm going to come in now, as you see, with a charcoal and create the general features of it, the outlines of it and the general features. I'm really interested in this charcoal. I've just recently been starting to use it. This will serve as the shadow and the dark areas of the image. So I'm going to be coming in, you'll see in a second, I'll be coming in with some water to smear it and to smooth it out. And so I'll be able to push this into the corners and to create some background darkness, which will give it some dimension. And as you can tell with this charcoal, this is a chunky piece. It really doesn't allow for too much precision, and I'm happy about that, so that I don't think too hard, and it lets me be fairly whimsical about the image that I put on there. And actually in this case, I'm not only using the water, but I also saved some of my yellow paint, and so I'm using that to help blend. The charcoal, I find that if I just use the water with it, it does tend to act somewhat like a watercolor, so that if you come over the top of it again with some other color or paint, it will wash away. You can wipe it away, and I'm wanting my charcoal to not get wiped away if I come over the top of it again with something else. Generally I don't, and so it's not a concern, but I have the yellow left over from the background and I don't want it to go to waste, so I'm going to use that to help shade. Now when I do this, it gives the roundedness to the image, and it also helps define the edges, so I get two benefits from doing this. And this really feels like I'm sculpting a little bit. I'm pushing some areas to the background and allowing some of the other areas to be more in the foreground, or closer to the picture plane. So you can see, like, when your eyes are usually a little sunken in and they have a shadow line associated with them. So I'm going in and I'm pulling from the eyebrow down into the eye socket area, leaving the head, the forehead and the upper above the eyebrows to be the lighter part of it. So I'm wanting more darkness under the eyebrows than above them. And then the same for your cheekbones. Under your cheekbones is generally a little bit more indented, so I'm trying to pull some of that under your cheekbone areas into some of the pull some shadedness into that area. And here with the eyes, I'm just leaving them, the dark color, and you'll see later where I pull in some details with it. But right now, this is very general, thinking about the light and the dark and the roundness of this face. That's mostly what I'm concerned about at this moment. And so where are the dark places? Where are the lighter places? The bridge of the nose is going to stay. I'm not going to treat that. That doesn't need any darkness on it. So wherever that line is, I'm going to darken it to the inside, where the eye sockets are, and leave the bridge untouched. I'm going to come in with a highlight for that. All right, so continuing on with the other side of the face. I really love this step, even if I'm not entirely sure what my end result is going to be. This to me feels like some of the expression starts to come out. I start to understand the personality of the thing that it is that I'm making, and maybe a little story emerges or personality starts to emerge right in front of my eyes as I'm making it, and that feels like a really gratifying and fun part of this process for me. I really enjoy that. So here the upper lip usually is a little bit darker than the lower lip, of course depending on the light source, right? So I'm generally assuming that the light source is above eye line and or maybe above the forehead, above the head at some point, and so it's casting downward. And if that's the case, then you're going to get the shadows in the eye socket areas and under the nose and on the bottom of the lip and under the bottom lip as well, and in the cheekbone areas. So I'm specifically putting the dark areas in as if my light source were slightly above the head. And then there's also a shadow under the chin and around the neck area. Try to make that look more of like a cylinder, rounded quality to it. So at this point, I'm not entirely sure what this creature is. I kind of like that it's emerging as partly animal. I don't know what kind of animal, maybe a bear, I'm not sure, and partly human. And I'm just going to keep going with that and see where it takes me. And here I'm just finishing up with body. And this will be the dark aspects, the shadows and the roundedness. That's what the whole charcoal piece was working toward. And now we're ready for the highlights. So the same way that we were looking at this face as a sphere and a rounded three-dimensional object, and thinking about where the dark areas are, now we're thinking about where are all of the light areas. So we put the highlights in all of the places where the light is hitting directly upon it. And considering that the light source is consistently above the face, now it's going to hit the bridge of the nose, it's going to hit the forehead, the tips of the ears, it's going to hit on the high cheekbones, on the chin, the bottom lip area, and there will also be some places in the eye as well. But I also want to make sure that I have a little bit of blending going on so it doesn't look too stark or dotted. And I'm using gesso for this rather than the titanium white, and I do that because when the gesso dries you can see some of the color underneath of it, and so it gives it a little bit more unifying aspects to it. And I also use the gesso for the whites of the eyes so that the whites of the eyes don't turn out to be too white, because we know that there's a shadow cast into the eye socket area. Even though we know that your whites of your eyes are white, there's still a shadow there, and I like that the gesso gives it the white quality, but it also is shaded, and that produces a really nice quality. I'm really intrigued here where the personality is starting to really emerge. Now I go through and put in a little bit more of the details. And I have here a charcoal pencil with a tip that I can control a little bit more. And I don't outline everything. I just outline the places that need more description and more detail. So generally the top of the eyelid, the pupils of the eyes, sometimes around the irises as well, if I haven't been too precise with the whites of the eyes. And then in the middle of the mouth, where the mouth parts, I don't outline the lips, I just through the middle of the mouth. And then sometimes I also put, I didn't in this case, but I also put in the dots of the nostrils because those are the darkest places on the face. And then I come in again with some water on a very fine tip brush and blend it a little bit so it's more soft. And here we go. We have a face that has the darks and the lights, and then to add the extra little sparkle, we put a dot in the eye, and that gives it some life. And I'm thinking that this piece needs a little bit more, and I recently made some stamps, so I'm wanting to use those because they've just been fun and I just made them, and so I'm thinking I'll apply these to the background. Usually I will do this at my background step, you know, much sooner before I even put an image on it so that I can overlay the image. But, you know, things kind of go how they go, and in this case I'm putting it on at the end because I have the space there and I'm wanting to put some additional details in there somewhere to make it more interesting. So I'll add that in there. And sometimes I'll add, you know, if this turns out to be telling me like some kind of a story, I'll write something on there that maybe this creature is thinking, or another message or a quote that might be interesting for my son, or something that he's been doing recently that's relevant to him. A lot of times I'll like to try to make the image match what's going on in his life, which these days is a lot of Minecraft, but you can only make so much Minecraft before you need to try something else. So here I'm going to put on some more of another stamp along the edge with a very light silver, so it's not, I want these to be in the background. I don't want them to compete with the image, so I'm trying to keep it fairly light and not a lot of contrast. So you can't really see in this light, but when the light hits it in a particular way, you can see that those lines are there and the silver is on the edge. And this will be my final stamp. And now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, what is this creature thinking or saying or doing? And I decide to add some words from a book that I had cut up. And I often don't really get specific choice about it. It's not like the words that I want are right there on the book. So they're on the book page. So I look at the page and I think, well, what's here that I can make my own sentence from and piece some words together? And it doesn't always have to make a whole lot of sense. It can just be suggestive, or it can have a particular mood to it, and not really describe something very specifically. So this one happens to say dance in the sunlight, and I think that that's a nice sentiment, and so that's what my lunch note will be about for this particular day. And there you have it, lunch note for today.